than this man right next to me. Some of you might know him as Napa Dave. He's the president of the Carson Colorado Railroad, has done amazing work to preserve the history of railroading in the Owens Valley, and it lives on. So without further ado, Dave, tell us a little bit about the Slim Princess.
I will, thank you. So actually this was not the end of the line though. The end of the line was about another 2.5 miles out, and it was named Jiggerville. I don't know why they named it Jiggerville. I have no idea. I'm not going to go any farther than that with that, but that was actually on one of my old railroad maps. So that was Inyo Development out there. So this railroad was built started in 1880. In 1880, the boys from the Virginia and Truckee Railroad got together and said, you know, there's silver down there at Cerro Gordo, and there's also minerals all the way. The Candelaria was a big mine at that point. And so in 1880, they started, they got the money together and started building the railroad. Now they were what they call a standard gauge railroad for the Virginia and Truckee. D.O. Mills and Yerington, and there's a couple other characters in there too. But anyway, they built this railroad as a narrow gauge. They were about 1/3 smaller, which meant it was 1/3 cheaper. And they were looking for cheap at this point because they had a lot of mountains to go over. Of course, they came down over Montgomery Pass, and they actually dug a 249-foot tunnel there to get over the pass, and it was 7,000 feet, I believe, at the top there. So they're easier to negotiate with narrow gauge than they are with standard gauge. They make corners tighter and everything. Anyway, they arrived here in August of 1883, built this depot here, and the president, I believe it was D.O. Mills, got off the railroad, and that first trip down, all the way down, I think it took him 2.5 days to get here, and he got off and he goes, gentlemen, we either built this railroad 300 miles too long or 300 years too soon. It was a long, dusty, dirty, probably hot by the time they were there in August. So Jim Butler also said this was a railroad that started nowhere, ended nowhere, and stopped all night to think it over. So yeah, it was a redheaded stepchild of the Virginia and Truckee. Carson and Colorado kept it until 1900. They shipped the ore out of there. There was actually a Cerro Gordo. It was the end of the tramway right there. Tramway loading dock right there, and of course down here the plant that was in operation at that time. There was also Inyo Development out here on the lake, which had their own railroad there. It was a small gauge, I believe 24-inch there, and of course out there at Inyo Development, that was their own railroad as well. So when they got out there, they had to have their own people running that.
Dave, I'm sorry. Is that natural soda products?
Natural soda products, right?
That was connected with Inyo Development. That was
Inyo Development was owned by Yerington at one time. I don't believe that. I think that was gone by the time this started up. But we actually, the folks in our group here would know, but we got the fire truck from Inyo Development the other day. It was donated to us years ago, and the Model T Club came up to our shop in Independence there. And so what are you going to do with that? I don't know, we'll restore it someday. They took it, restored it back to running order. It looks just like it did in 1926. I mean, we didn't paint it or anything, of course, just made it run. Anyway, my group, you don't know, we started about 1997 when an old character wandered in my store, a guy named Myron Alexander, and he had a grease fitting off the steam locomotive. And I didn't know what it was at that time. Picked it up and went, what in the heck are you trying to grease with that? And says, that steam locomotive in the park in Independence. Well, what are you doing? He says, well, I talked to Bill Michaels. I'm going to clean it up a little. It looks terrible. I said, well, I agree with you there. I'm born and raised in Independence and had a lot of birds crapping on it over the years, and nobody really caring about it. So anyway, started with him, a couple of other characters, friends of mine. We get together on a Saturday and take things off and clean them up, put them back on there. Fast forward to about, it would have been about 2010, I guess, we decided to, Randy Babcock, which is our vice president, he's actually the chief mechanical officer for the Durango and Silverton Railroad. So he knows trains, and he's the one that actually, we were sitting around having a beer in the afternoon. What are you going to do with this thing? You know, what are we going to do? It's our plan. Oh, can we make it run? He goes, yeah, we can make it run. We got to come up with some money. We did come up with some money. We had a significant donor. We restored that thing back to running order. It's been to Durango, 2 times. It's been to Virginia, well, actually Carson City for their little event up there once. Been to Laws twice. We're in the process right now of putting it back together so it will run again this year. But that's the history of that. The railroad here didn't make a lot of money. The first year they actually came up with a 25% profit. Wow, this is great. The next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years it was in the hole. They just weren't shipping enough ore to make it profitable. So in 1900 they decided to sell the Carson Colorado, and Southern Pacific was glad to buy it, I believe, for $2.5 million. The next month after the check cleared, somewhere thereabouts, silver was found in Tonopah. So that railroad, the Tonopah Junction, they called it, which came down from Mina and then up over the hill. They built the railroad, narrow gauge to start, all the way into Tonopah, and ultimately the other railroads came in from the south as well. But they standard gauged that, I believe, in about 1905 or 6, and that made a 3-rail, what they called it. So you'd run the standard gauge on the outside, narrow gauge on the inside. Well, that lasted until about 1938, when they decided that the narrow gauge really wasn't making any money here. They knew they weren't shipping much, so they pulled the rail. 1938, they brought all the cars, the narrow gauge cars, over the hill, and they, during the war, probably 40 or 41, they pulled all the rail up over the top. So by 46, 47, the only place this railroad ran was from here, down here, and Laws, back and forth. Now, they had a transfer trestle at Inyo, and that was so they could, but in 1908, they were starting to build the aqueduct. So they brought they called it the Jawbone branch, came up from Mojave all the way up here on the other side of the lake, and then through Lone Pine, through close to Lone Pine. The Carson, Colorado, when they originally built this thing, never hit any of the major cities. They always built it on the other side of the river. And they had a bad experience, I believe, with the Carson River, and washed out the railroad more than once, and they said, we're not going to cross the darn thing. Ultimately, they did cross it when the Tinnemaha Dam was built, but that was Southern Pacific days then. So not the best water on this side of the valley either, so they had to do a lot of water treatment there. But this depot, in 1960, they ultimately abandoned the line and towed number 9 to Laws. We've got a couple of Laws folks here, and in fact, John here has taken number 9 into the shop. There was 3 locomotives that were left on this line back in the 28, I guess. That they had like 10 of them, and they kept the ones that were not so good a order, they'd ship out and scrap, but ultimately ended up with 3 of them. And then in 1954, they bought an electric locomotive, diesel electric, and that replaced number 8, which ended up in Sparks, and our number 18, which ended up the park in Independence. So that's an interesting story about Anna Kelly. If any of you old-timers here remember her, OK Kelly had the gas station on the south end of Independence there, and she was a railroad brat. Her family was all involved with Southern Pacific. So she wrote a letter to Southern Pacific in 1954, 53, when they knew they were going to scrap the locomotives if they didn't have a place to go. And she said, you guys are just going to sell that thing to Disneyland. We want it for our park. And ultimately, Southern Pacific did donate it and the manpower to put it in the park in Independence. So, and then we came along 62 years later. Believe it or not, when we fired that thing up originally in the park, we were reading the book later to find out, well, when was the last run? 62 years and 1 day. It's amazing, from the last time it had run till we fired it. So it's pretty amazing. But our plans with it are just to run it in Independence. It's kind of our ambassador to Inyo County. We ship it around the country and let people see how it runs. Good for the school kids to see how technology, the space shuttle from 1911. Seriously, it was that was the fastest thing around at that time. So we've actually been inside the depot. We can't get in there today. It's still preserved. Unfortunately, it's had some thefts. The windows broken, the roof's fallen in. But there is still signs above the loading doors on the outside. One of them will say Cerro Gordo. One of them will say Darwin. There was another name there. I don't remember exactly what it was, but they're all still up on the wall there. loading dock, so that they would bring maybe a flat car in right there if they wanted to load like a dozer or a tractor or just a bunch of stuff. They could drive on that and then load it that way.
Team track.
Yeah, exactly.
Team track. It was
That
open
thing's-
for various people.
That thing hinges up and down there on the end. So you hinge it up like this, pull the train in, and then drop it down so it's on the car. So that's the way you'd load heavy equipment or heavy stuff, you know.
Not dedicated for, it was for like general use. The team track.
Station there at Inyo back, I bet from 08 on up till 1960, but it's actually built out of 3 different boxcars. And you can see if we can get inside, you'll see what it is, but this is boxcar brown, and there are 3 boxcars disassembled and put back together. You come inside and look, this is the side of a boxcar right here, and there's another one back there, and then this that's been cut out on this side. So that's how they moved it so easy, is because it was 3 boxcars when they tore it apart and bolted it back together. Yeah, I don't know the numbers of the cars, but they're probably 1880s. They shut down the entire railroad. Man, I need locomotive because they were not.
This recalls that Fergie, whenever he wasn't busy maintaining his engine in the line, would take a group of kids into the cab and run the train for them down maybe 100 yards or so. Right, Francis?
That's correct.
Yeah. So what a thrill that must have been.
Oh boy, it was a great thrill for us kids, and I think I was only maybe 9 years older then. And
That would have been a dream for me too. But yeah, so also, given the fact that we have this beautiful scenery, this has been a mecca for movie making. Hollywood coming up here, and
I lived in Keeler, and this particular intersection holds a memory because on my way from home, which is that way, to the school over here, I saw on top of a horse a cowboy. So I went up to the cowboy and I asked, if I could touch his horse. Later I learned that I was touching Champion, Gene Autry's horse. My father worked here for the narrow gauge in the 40s and in the 50s. And Dave, a few minutes ago, talked about the pit in which the employee would go into in order to do whatever maintenance was required from the bottom up, so to speak. So my dad did that. And he also had the great fortune of being supervised by a legend, narrow gauge, and that was Mr. Ferguson, also referred to as Fergie. Fergie took my dad, so to speak, under his wing. My dad came here from Mexico, and he was attempting to master English, and Fergie admonished him that unless he learned to do that, he wouldn't go very far. And later, as I said, I attended first grade here before moving on to Lone Pine. My dad was transferred to Owens, and people often ask me, what was the difference between Keeler and Owens? Well, I don't think there was that much difference, except here, of course, they had the school and they had the plunge, the pool, where I learned how to swim.